Project Management, Chapter 9. So, in Chapter 9, we talk about reducing project duration. So, we have cost time trade offs. Generally, reducing the time of a project increases the cost of a project. Reasons that we might want to um, reduce the amount of time are some examples here below. We might have time to market pressures. There might be a bonus for early completion. There might be imposed deadlines and different contract commitments. We might be able to save overhead costs from reducing the time frame and increase our public goodwill by having anything that could benefit the public done early. We might also have restraints on resources that other projects need, and that gives us an incentive to get one project finished earlier to move resources to another project. When we're looking at accelerating project completion, we need to know whether or not resources are constrained. If resources are not constrained, we have the ability to add additional resources in order to shorten the amount of time. We can also outsource project work to other teams or even outside the company by hiring someone else to do part of the work. We can have our current team work overtime. Now, overtime only reduces time to a point because we still only have 24 hours available in a day, and it can greatly increase the cost. Just like we mentioned in Chapter 3, having a core project team that does nothing but work on projects and doesn't have any outside distractions besides projects automatically makes projects go faster because we're not scheduling their time availability across that. Another way is to do it twice. First, do it fast and then correctly. This, the example the book gives for this is in software. So we can release a version of the software that might not be fantastic, but it's out there. And then we can release updates to the software as needed to get rid of any bugs or anything. If we have constrained resources, we have some conflicting things with reducing completion. So then we have to look at what's called crashing the project or reducing the project scope or compromising quality. So in order to make a project happen faster when we can't add any additional resources in cost or in people or equipment, we might have to compromise the quality, reduce the project scope, remove things from the project that we had originally promised, or we need to find ways to improve what our project team can do with the time that they have available. So when we're looking at reducing our project costs, first we have to gather information about those project costs. So what are the direct costs and indirect costs? And what are those direct costs to reduce project time? What direct costs are going to increase? What indirect costs might we be able to avoid? So we want to have a good information about our costs. Then we're going to look at our critical activities for the lowest direct cost activities to shorten that project duration. We want to compute the total cost for specific durations and then compare to benefits of reducing project time. When we look at this process, we might say in order to shorten critical activity B, we can do that if we add $25 a day for every day that we shorten it, as an example. Then we want to look at, is it worth it to us to add $25 a day to shorten the duration of that component? And what are the risks and benefits outside of cost to reducing time on those projects? We have project indirect costs and project direct costs. Indirect costs are our overhead costs. So those are costs that can't be associated with the actual project, work package, or activity. These things include supervision, administration, outside consultants, interest expenses, any costs that vary or increase with time. Um, Reducing the project time directly reduces indirect costs. We also want to look at if there are costs of going over time, etc. Project direct costs are those costs that can be assigned directly to specific work packages or activities. These tend to be things like direct labor, direct materials, any equipment we're using, any subcontractors we're using for the cost. Anytime we crash activities, we increase direct costs. So we can generally save on indirect costs by decreasing the amount of time that we're working on a project, but that has a direct result in increasing direct costs. We can look at this graph. This is a project cost duration graph, which shows how over the time of the project, indirect costs go up and direct costs go down. We have a low cost plan duration point and the optimum cost time point where our costs meet each other on this graph. So we can look at this graph and look at areas where we can reduce any time to market deadline. Then we're going to look at how we can cut any costs and time. So when we're constructing this project cost duration graph, one, we have to know all of the total direct costs and the total indirect costs for our project and the time durations. Then we want to sum the direct and indirect costs for these selected project durations so that we have total costs in general. And we want to compare any cost alternatives and their benefits. We're going to determine which activities can be shortened. First, we're going to shorten the activities with the smallest increase in time and cost per unit of time. So for example, if we have activities A through G, and we look at the cost to shorten each one of those, and shortening B costs $20 a day, but shortening D costs $50 a day, then first we're going to focus on B because it has the smallest increase in cost per unit of time. We have a lot of assumptions when we're looking at these examples. One, the first assumption is that the cost-time relationship is linear. So there's exact linear correlation between additional costs and a savings in time. Our normal project time assumes low-cost, efficient methods to complete the activity. So we want to create these project cost duration information under normal circumstances. We want to have this information before a project starts. We don't want to be looking at this in the middle of the project when we're already in a time crunch. We also have that the crash time represents a limit, which is the greatest time reduction possible under realistic conditions. Our slope represents a constant cost per unit of time. So that's that linear relationship again. So we have our crash cost minus our normal cost over our change in time. That gives us our cost addition per unit of time. And then any accelerations must occur within our normal and crash times. So we're looking at this information and we have that our normal duration is 10 days. our crash duration is 5 days. At our normal time of 10 days, our normal cost is $400. However, if we shorten that activity duration by 5 days, we are going to double the amount that it costs. So we're looking at this example of cost time trade-off. So we have our normal time direct cost and our crash time direct cost. The slope is the amount of cost that we increase by reducing the time or crashing that activity. So we can see here that we have activities A through G. It tells us that G cannot be changed, but we can add costs of anywhere from $20 to $40 in order to reduce the amount of time required for any one of these activities. The greatest crash that we can do is on D, where we can crash that by 4 days. Next, we look at our project network, and we can see these same exact activities and how we might change this. So in our original plan, we have a 25-day time frame with an initial total direct cost of $450. We start by looking at A because that is the cheapest activity to change. So we take 1 day off of A at an increase of $20. That reduces our time to 24 days and increases our cost to $470. We then look at any other activities we can change. For example, here we have now activity D is a $25 change. We can reduce 2 days. So instead of taking the 25-day time, we now have 23 days, and our total direct cost is going to be $495. So we've crashed both A and D. Next, we have F that can be crashed for a cost of $30. Now we've taken 3 total days off of the time that our activity is going to take, or our total project, but we've increased by $20 for A, plus $25 for D, plus $30 for F. So when we put all of that together, we have a total direct cost has changed from $450 to $610. But we've managed to take 4 days off of the time that we can do this. However, the downside of that is that we take activity, when we crash a network, we almost always make every single activity critical for their time consumption. So we can see here how our total costs and our indirect costs change depending on the project duration. So as we reduce the amount of time that project costs, our direct costs increase and our direct costs decrease, or indirect costs decrease. So we can see that looking at the different time options, that at 22 days, that is our best option for total cost of the project. That's where we have the most benefit in indirect cost savings versus the direct costs increasing. So we can see here on our graph that optimum cost time point is at the 22-day duration. When practical considerations that we have to use is one, when we're using that project cost duration graph, is one, we want to have that graph done before the project starts. This might seem counterintuitive. Why am I already looking at different ways that I can crash the project before I even start the project? want the project to happen under optimal conditions. Well, everyone does, but we want to have that plan in place so we aren't hit with any emergency options, because emergencies always start increased costs and increased project times. We also want to look at the crash time. So knowing what crash times are can be difficult. They're rough estimates at best. Any cost savings and crash time savings is a judgment-based decision, which is open to interpretation. We also have that linear assumption. So that assumption that all costs are linear and any increase in days increases direct costs and will save us indirect costs. We might also need to look at our choice of activities to crash. So when we look at the cheapest method for reducing the duration of the project, we also need to consider any other things that aren't just involved in the cost savings. We also need to look at if there are any risks involved to crashing specific activities. We need to look at the timing of the activities. For example, if we crash two activities, if you remember in chapter 8 when we were talking about resource allocation, think about if we need 3 backhoes and we only have 3 available to us. And so we do our resource planning, and then in this chapter we look at crashing that activity, and crashing that activity requires us to go up to 4 backhoes when we only have 3 available. So that's something that we need to think about too, especially if we're looking at we don't have the money to go out and just get a 4th backhoe. We also need to look at the sensitivity of our project network. How sensitive is our project network to critical paths versus non-critical paths? So non-critical paths are easier to crash than critical paths. We need to make sure that we're not adding too many critical paths where we just increase the risks and the cost of meeting our deadline. What if cost, not time, is the issue? So it's not our time that is the problem, but it's just straight money. So we look at different ways to cut costs. The very first one is reducing the project scope. So reducing the amount of deliverables that we have on a project in order for it to not go over, delivering less than what was originally planned. Of course, we have to make sure that we're not going to anger our client or customer with that option. The next one is having the owner take on more responsibility. So what can they do that they don't have to pay you for? One of the examples that the textbook gives, for example, is in home construction projects or home projects, having the homeowner do the painting rather than paying a subcontractor to do the painting, or maybe doing in-house training for new software instead of paying the company to offer the training. Can we outsource project activities or even the entire project at a cost savings? And then the last is to brainstorm cost savings options. What can our team come up with for cost savings? Asking your team members if they have ideas. Usually the most valuable information that we can get about cost saving and time saving measures come directly from the people who are involved in doing the work on a daily basis. So asking them for their input and getting their input can be extremely beneficial.